Hello everyone, today we will be discussing the hormonal control of implantation and early embryonic development. We'll cover where these hormones are produced, their roles, as well as their coordination that allows pregnancies to develop within a woman's body. We will first begin with implantation, and implantation is the embedding of a fertilized egg into the endometrial layer of the uterus. The fertilized egg has 23 pairs of maternal and paternal chromosomes that are joined together, which allows it to begin mitosis as it moves from the fallopian tube into the uterus. It's dividing, and so by the time it reaches the uterus, it has about 100 cells. This process takes about 4 to 5 days, and the important hormone to note is progesterone, and progesterone has a few roles here. You might remember from the Silverthorn chapter that progesterone is responsible for the thickening of the endometrial layer, and this prepares the uterus for pregnancy. It also includes depositing lipids and glycogen into the endometrial cell cytoplasms, and this will allow for the embryo to have some nutrition as it develops in the endometrial layer. Progesterone also causes the smooth muscle of the fallopian tube to relax, and this allows for the slow progress of the fertilized egg from down the fallopian tube and into the uterus. This allows it to continue dividing as it moves into the uterus. Progesterone also plays a role in the thickening of the cervical mucus, which prevents bacteria as well as any foreign material from entering the uterus. So by the time the fertilized egg reaches the uterus, it is a blastocyst, which means it has around 100 cells. Different layers of the blastocyst will form different layers of both the embryos as well as the extra-embryonic membranes. An important layer to note is the outer layer of the blastocyst, which will eventually become the chorion, which will enclose the embryo and form the placenta. So to implant, the blastocyst secretes enzymes, and these enzymes digest the endometrial layer and allow the blastocyst to be engulfed by the endometrium, and so it's completely covered by the endometrial layer so that it can be properly protected as well as nourished. The chorion develops these projections which are known as chorionic villi, and you might remember that the enterocytes of the intestinal cells also have villi. So picture the projections of those villi in a similar manner, but the chorionic villi are projecting into the area of maternal blood vessels in the endometrium. The chorionic villi secrete enzymes that break down the walls of the maternal blood vessels, and blood begins to pool, which will eventually form the placenta. The placenta is a large source of maternal blood pooling. It gets about 10% of the cardiac output, which play an important role in the secretion of hormones by the placenta, which we'll get into a little bit later in this lecture. Next, we will move on to the corpus luteum and its role in the production of hormones, as well as the transition from the corpus luteum into the placenta in secreting hormones. So you might remember from the Silverthorn chapter that the corpus luteum is formed from the follicle after ovulation. So once the egg bursts from the follicle, the leftover cells migrate and change to form the corpus luteum, which is able to secrete hormones. And these hormones are progesterone, estrogen, and inhibin. Progesterone is the hormone that we're focusing in this phase because it would be the hormone that is allowing for the thickening of the endometrial layer and preparing for pregnancy. It's the dominant hormone in this stage. So once the progesterone and estrogen are being produced by the corpus luteum, this is feeding back to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary so that less follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, as well as gonadotropin-releasing hormone, are being produced. This allows for another follicle to not develop while just after ovulation. If after the 12-day life cycle of the corpus luteum there is no pregnancy, the corpus luteum will undergo apoptosis. This will cause the levels of progesterone and estrogen to decrease and the levels of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone to rise. This begins the secretory phase of the uterine cycle, or the period, as well, also known as the menses, in which the woman will shed her endometrial layer, and the cycle will begin again. However, if pregnant, the developing placenta of the embryo will send a hormone signal to the corpus luteum to continue secreting progesterone and estrogen to continue the pregnancy. This hormone is HCG, and we'll get into the specifics of this hormone a little bit later on in this lecture. Important thing to note is after about the 7th week of pregnancy, the placenta takes over the secretion of hormones because it has fully developed, and the corpus luteum is no longer needed. This causes the corpus luteum to degenerate. The corpus luteum is not active throughout the pregnancy, as the placenta takes over secreting the hormones. The placenta secretes many hormones, but the ones that we will focus on today are HCG, HCS, estrogen, and progesterone. The image on the left of the screen is showing the ovarian cycle, and the portion that we want to focus on is after ovulation, where you'll see the leftover cells of the follicle begin to turn yellow, and this is how we know that the corpus luteum is developing. The corpus luteum gets its name because of its yellow color. After it has degenerated, it turns white and is known as the corpus albicans. The image on the right is showing the placenta, and I wanted to point out in the zoomed in portion, the closer look at the placenta, that the maternal and fetal blood are very closely connected by the placenta. This means that the hormones produced by the placenta will enter the maternal bloodstream rapidly. So the first hormone produced by the placenta that I want to discuss is HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. As I mentioned on the last slide, its primary function is to signal the corpus luteum to remain active during pregnancy. This means that the corpus luteum will continue secreting the hormones necessary to continue the pregnancy. HCG is considered the chemical signal of pregnancy. It's a peptide hormone secreted by the chorionic villi, and then as the placenta develops, by the placenta. It's structurally related to luteinizing hormone and can bind to luteinizing hormone receptors, which is important in the utilization of this hormone. Because levels of HCG rise so greatly early on in pregnancy, this could be a hormone that's related to nausea or vomiting of early pregnancy. Secondarily, the function of HCG is to stimulate the developing testes of male fetuses to produce testosterone, and testosterone has an important role in the descent of the testes as well as the expression of male characteristics. But this is the secondary function, as the primary function is to signal the corpus luteum. Because the corpus luteum is not active throughout the pregnancy, HCG levels diminish when the corpus luteum is not necessary anymore. Once the placenta takes over secreting the hormones, HCG levels will taper off. Another thing I wanted to note is, as I mentioned that HCG is the chemical signal, or considered the chemical signal for pregnancy, it is the hormone that is tested in at-home pregnancy tests or urine pregnancy tests. Before there were urine pregnancy tests, HCG was injected, or the women who thought they might be pregnant injected their urine into rabbits, and HCG induced ovulation. The rabbits were then killed, and the ovaries looked at for signs of ovulation. That was pregnancy tests of the past. Now, however, you use a urine pregnancy test to test for levels of HCG. Two images on the right show a pregnancy test to remind you the HCG is the chemical signal for pregnancy, and down below you can see the rabbits lined up to receive their urine injection and serve as the pregnancy tests of the past. On the left, you can see the kind of the cycle of these hormones and the feedback of these hormones on one another. HCG is produced by the embryo within the uterus, which then signals the corpus luteum back in the ovary to continue producing progesterone to maintain the endometrium and protect the uterus by thickening the cervical mucus. The next hormone I wanted to talk about is human chorionic gonadotropin, or more simply HCS. It's also known as human placental lactogen, and this is because it was originally thought to play a large role in the development of breasts during pregnancy. However, women that can't produce HCS are able to lactate normally, so it's unclear exactly how necessary it is for breast development during pregnancy. Its primary role is the alteration of maternal glucose and fatty acid metabolism, which helps to support fetal nutrition. Now, it is also a peptide hormone, and it is also produced by the placenta, similar to HCG in this way. And it's structurally related to growth hormone and prolactin, which show how its roles in kind of the growth and development of this fetus, as well as the growth of or the breast development during pregnancy. How the alteration of maternal glucose metabolism occurs is that this hormone acts to decrease maternal insulin sensitivity. This means that there will be more blood glucose there will be more glucose in maternal blood. And so this means that more glucose will be available to the fetus, which can move through the placenta by facilitated diffusion. So this hormone also acts to increase maternal lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat to release more free fatty acids, and the mother can use this as fuel because so much glucose is being sent to the fetus. And this is the body's safeguard to protect fetal nutrition, even if there is poor nutrition in the mother, even if there is malnutrition of the mother, the fetus will get enough glucose to develop. However, some women do develop gestational diabetes due to an insulin resistance, and this is an increase in blood glucose that is above normal range. Most of the time, this case of diabetes, this gestational diabetes, goes away after delivery, but you can be at a greater risk to develop type 2 diabetes if you have had gestational diabetes during your pregnancies. There's also some risk on the fetus if you do have these high levels of blood glucose, such as a greater birth weight for these cases, or a greater risk for a cesarean delivery in some cases. Now, the image below the text on the left will kind of show you this cycle and the coordination of this hormone and how it affects the insulin levels, which in turn raise the blood glucose, which in turn means that more blood glucose is going to the fetus. The second thing I wanted to note was, if you move to the right image, like I mentioned on the last slide, HCG is going to rise early on in pregnancy and then taper off. However, HCS is going to continually rise throughout the pregnancy. This is because of its important roles in the development of the fetus and the alteration of nutrition to allow the fetus to continue to develop. The last two hormones we'll be talking about today are estrogen and progesterone. These two hormones are produced continuously, first by the corpus luteum and then by the placenta once it's developed. Estrogen plays a role in the development of milk ducts within the breasts. This allows lactation to support the baby once it's born, and the progesterone maintains the endometrial layer throughout the pregnancy, as well as suppresses uterine contractions later in pregnancy. I wanted our eyes to move to the image on the right, where you can see the ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Once they are increased, the pituitary hormones, FSH and LH, are decreased. This is because of the feedback of estrogen and progesterone on the pituitary to suppress the formation of any follicles during pregnancy. This allows the FSH and LH to be kept low. However, it's important to note that this image is taken from a diagram depicting the typical ovarian cycle, not necessarily during pregnancy, but I wanted to use it to point out the feedback of progesterone and estrogen on FSH and LH. If you move to the image on the left, you can see that estrogen and progesterone are increasing throughout the pregnancy, and this is important to note because these hormones are so important for pregnancy. If there's low progesterone, there could be a miscarriage. Thank you for listening to my consideration of the hormones that are important in implantation and early embryonic development. Thank you for your time.